In the movie's prologue, we watch a woman who was hugging her son and assuring him that it was all a nightmare. Jess is the name of this lady and she tells him that she is on his side. Jess was getting ready to leave the following day, and when she leaves her home and enters the garden to collect clothes, there, she finds her son's shattered toy. While painting inside the house, her son's paints fell to the ground and the doorbell rang as Jess was cleaning it, but when she stepped outside to answer it, no one was there. Now that Jess is back, she starts to pack her bags and her kid is also welcome to join her. Her kid, however, was refusing to accompany her and still refuses to do so. She leaves her son at home and goes outdoors alone. "Why are you worried?" he queries as Jess approaches her pal. She informs him that the only thing bothering me right now is exhaustion. She is introduced to his other buddies via her buddy, and Triangle was the name of the yacht where they intended to work. Many more pals were aboard the boat with Jess in addition to them. Jess falls asleep on the ship after leaving shore and dreams of her hat on a beach. Meanwhile, she awakens in terror and a buddy approaches her and inquires, "What happened?" She claims that the only thing I've seen is probably a nightmare. Greg, a friend of Jess's, his buddy comes up to him and asks whether Jess planned to bring her son along. Greg explains to him that her son had attended school at the time. "What do you have to do with this?" Greg urges his pal, "Keep concentrating on your work." After some time had passed, a huge storm was getting close to their ship. Greg was making contact with the other ship to request assistance, but he hears a girl's sound on the radio in the meantime. She said that he would both kill us and save us. Later, when she disconnects, a severe storm strikes that area, and despite their efforts, their ship has sunk in the storm. They could all flee since they were all wearing life jackets and they've all gotten on their sinking ship now. However, one of their buddies vanished and hasn't been seen since. Meanwhile, they see a large ship approaching from a distance. They all covertly board the ship while waving their hands for assistance. After not finding anyone on the ship, they conclude that the whole ship was deserted. When Jess notices the ship, she tells Greg, "It seems like I've been here before." There is a photo that Jess's other pals can view, and the ship was sketched in the image. There was a portrait of a king next to that. The monarch had returned his life from the death god, according to the writing underneath it. He craved immortality because he thought he would live eternally on Earth. He has been told to remove a giant stone from a sizable mountain by the god of death to be eligible to become everlasting forever. And ever since the king removed the stone from the mountain, it has been falling. It will continue until the monarch acknowledges his error. They were all reading the same history book when Jess' buddy investigates there after hearing something clanking. He finds several of Jess' keys. How could Jess's keys still be there since she was now with them? Everybody was stunned. In the meanwhile, one of them claims that it is a girl named Heather who vanished when the ship sank. They examine her in a room and they were astonished when they entered the room to see many editable items. It appeared as if someone had recently kept them there. When Jess' buddy asks what time it is, she discovers that her watch has stopped at 8:30 and Greg's watch has stopped at 11:30. In the meanwhile, Jess senses something and their two pals were still in the room when they went inside to check in the interim. Greg and Jess were engaged in conversation when a noise came from a nearby room. They enter to inspect the space, and in the mirror, they discover the words "Go to the theater" scribbled in blood. They walk inside the theater to investigate, but Jess forbade him, who then enters the theater. While they were out, Jess returned to the room where they had discovered a new supper. However, when she got back, she was surprised to see that the fresh food had been destroyed. Her two companions who had stayed in that room were also not there. That's why she speculates that they could have left the room. In the meanwhile, a buddy of Jess who was fully covered in blood arrives there and assaults Jess, who was attempting to defend herself, and fights back. She notices the death of her companion and the sound of a gunshot. She walks directly toward the theater, and her buddy Greg was also shot. "Do you know what Greg said before he passed away?" She asks Jess as one of his buddies is sobbing a much. Although Jess maintains, "I didn't do anything," he claimed that Jess had killed him. "Why would I kill Greg?" The second guy then remarks, "You came into our room and told us that Greg is phoning us. We came here in response to your order since Jess was utterly unconscious of everything that was happening to her." A stranger arrives and shoots both of her pals while they are still talking. The assailant was after Jess as she fled from there, but as Jess raced away from him, he runs out of ammo. Meanwhile, she spots an axe there. The murderer has followed her while she is still carrying the axe. He is attacked by Jess, who also hurts him and inquires about his identity and goals. As the killer was speaking, she overheard him remark, "To kill everyone, and it is the only way to get home." The killer afterward drove into the river and Jess was the only person there. In the meanwhile, she hears some sounds, and when she looks, she finds the same ship that has sunk. Everyone is still standing on it, including Jess, and they are still screaming for help. Jess leaves after being frightened by what she sees. At this moment, it becomes clear that Jess could have accidentally entered a time loop. All of her buddies have gotten on the ship. On this ship, Jess was also on board, and she was secretly watching everything. For a while, the same thing happens as we have seen before. The real Jess was the one who was watching everything in private, regardless of what had transpired with her pals. She was astounded by what she saw. She panics and goes into another room, dropping her key on floor. When Jess realized that the person there was the actual Jess, her buddy pursued her. After attacking Jess, he encounters the real Jess. She has also told him everything. Nobody was looking, so Jess yanks him away. His pal was hurt when his head collided with a handle as a consequence. Running into a room, Jess discovers a lot of documents inside. Kill everyone when they're on the ship. Jess notices several lockets of herself there as she rewrites the statement on paper. Jess understands that as a result, she has become stuck in a time loop. The real Jess resolves she'll find a way to escape this temporal paradox so she can see her kid. As Jess prepares to murder everyone with a pistol, her buddy approaches and steps in front of her. He was hurt, but Jess was unable to use her gun to shoot him. She instantly hides there after spotting her identical twin Jess, who was with her companions. Her companion died there as a result of her attempt to assassinate Jess. Later, we see a dead Greg and the original Jess who had previously existed. It implies that Greg's friend Jess was the one who killed him. They are approached by the elderly Jess, who brings them along. The old Jess tells them to ignore the actual Jess when she calls, then she drags the two of them into a room where she stabs them with a knife. Jess lost a male buddy, and the surviving friend enters control room. She also warns that she is murdering us over the radio. Greg, a friend of Jess's, also heard her sound, as we've witnessed before. It indicates that this loop has finished, and in the meanwhile, Greg heard the sounds of a storm. The girl who allegedly said she was murdering us in the control room. She has been approached by the actual Jess, but she thinks that this Jess has killed everyone. The real Jess is chasing her buddy. When she enters the ship, she sees Sally's countless dead bodies. All of this was taking place as a result of her attempt to alter the loop structure. The previous Jess made an effort to disrupt this tendency as well. The genuine Jess attempts to explain things to her buddy Sally. The new Jess arrives and throws the old Jess into the river, and Sally passes away too. Jess observes her whole party once more standing on the submerged ship. I pleaded for help, knowing full well that as everyone passes away, a new loop starts. For the third time, this party is presently boarding the ship. The real Jess must once more eliminate this bunch. She goes back inside the theater and scrawls "Go to the theater" on the mirror. When she enters, she queries her two companions who were already there about the whereabouts of the freshly prepared lunch. You received a call from Greg, as we've already seen. Greg is shot by Jess as she enters the theater. They now included the new Jess in their gang, and she shoots both of her buddies right away. She was running away from an odd murderer, as we'd already witnessed. And right now, the new Jess is frighteningly fleeing from the old Jess. The original Jess pursues the replacement Jess. After killing her whole gang and herself, the real Jess thinks this cycle will come to a stop, but it doesn't. The real Jess was thrown into sea by new Jess. Before passing away, the actual Jess says the same thing to the new Jess. The previous Jess told the present Jess that killing everyone will start this cycle. The actual Jess eventually appears, and she is found on the same beach that we initially saw at the opening of the film. On the Triangle ship, Jess dreamed while she slept. When she gets home, she finds a different Jess. Her youngster had left his toy in the garden, and she was reprimanding him for it. She was peeking into her house when her child noticed her. His paint runs onto the floor, and at home, Jess violently lashes him for it. She meanwhile rings her doorbell after becoming aware of this. When Jess exits to check, she comes inside. The real Jess kills the old Jess once she is inside. Her child had seen all that we had seen when the movie first started. It was only your nightmare, she says to her kid as she hugs him. The deceased body of the previous Jess was placed in a bag and kept in the car by the real Jess. A girl passes away in the car as she was driving with her kid after collapsing on the front screen. There were several girls there as she went to bury her. It suggests that there were other Jesses before this Jess showed up. She suddenly gets really confused and leaves. When he notices the blood on her car, her son becomes quite worried. Jess veers off course and her car collides with a truck. They were in an accident, however, even though Jessica and her child had perished, Jessica, who died, was a fictitious character. The taxi driver finds her after the real Jess fled. He starts to ask whether you're alright, and she says, "Yes, I'm fine." The actual Jess rides in the cab and arrives at the same location. She intended to board the triangular ship while seated to resume the process of getting her child back. "I've turned off my meter, ma'am, will you come back here?" the taxi driver says. "Yes, I'll come back here again," Jess responds. She recognizes her pal as she gets closer to the ship. "Have you brought your son with you?" he inquired. She says he had gone to go to school. The sequence that we saw at the beginning of the movie was repeated when Greg arrived there as well. This particular period was starting over again with Jess. To bring her kid back, she was starting the time loop all over again. She boarded the same ship as the rest of her company, and Jess' time loop probably keeps on. No one knows for sure when she will end this triangle. The actual story in this instance was how poorly Jess treated her son. She has been placed in a time loop by the death god as a lesson. As they have read on the ship about the death god and realizing her mistake was the only way to break out of this temporal trap. Later, to hide her error, this actual Jess continues to kill the other Jesses. Additionally, she attempted to run away with her son. Jess, however, was never aware of her error, and as a result, everything that happened to her caused her to repeatedly get caught in a loop in time. And the true driver was the deity of death who repeatedly abandons her on the same ship. The movie ends here. Thanks for watching and subscribe for more.